guess I'm starting. Well, it's so wonderful to be with all of you tonight on this fifth day of our session. It's been a very silent week. I want to start by just saying thank you, deep thanks, Roshi, for all the great years. You know, all the things I've learned and how you've held me and corrected me and, you know, been super thoughtful and all the adventures that we've been on around the world, really. I'm deeply grateful. Thank you so much. So it's ironic, really, that I'm talking tonight, you know, in the middle of session. I mean, I'm not the greatest at holding noble silence, so I guess it kind of does make sense in a way that I'm talking. And the other interesting part of this is I'm talking about silence. And silence is one of those things that I've always had a push-pull relationship with. When I was a little kid, I grew up on a mountainside in Colorado, and there was this rock way up the hill that was protruding, and you know, anytime I needed quiet, I would scramble up the hill and scale up this rock. You know, neither my brother nor my sister could climb that rock. And there was this perfect, like, lazy boy recliner rock back with arms that you could sit in at the top of it and really enjoy the view and just be peaceful. But, you know, eventually I'd have to go down the rock and go back home, back to my noisy family, which I needed as well. And then as a teenager, I discovered the Catholic holy hours. So I would light a candle and very meticulously sit for my hour. And I'm sure, you know, like there are occasions now, I'm waiting for the bell to ring. You know, I was waiting for that hour to be over. And then in my 20s, it became the Jesuit 30-day retreats, the silent retreats. Has anybody ever been on those? Oh, there you go. A couple of you have. Well, about day 10, you're like, what did I get myself into? Yeah. And because this week or this month, one of our themes is no words, I thought of this quote that I used when I was on those silent retreats that really helped me sort of think about silence and no words. And it's a Khalil Gibran quote. You know, he's a Lebanese American writer. So I wanted to share it with you. You talk when you cease to be at peace with your thoughts. And when you can no longer dwell in the solitude of your heart, you live in your lips. And the sound is a diversion and a pastime. And in much of your talking, thinking is half murdered. For thought is a bird of space that in a cage of words may indeed unfold its wings, but it cannot fly. So in the Zendo this week, you know, we've been keeping a lot of silence. We've been sitting a lot, and it's so silent in that Zendo. Sometimes it amazes me. And, you know, we keep this silence for a good reason because, you know, it's part of our practice. But also, you know, sitting on that cushion, silence isn't always easy. How many of you, I'm just curious, struggle a bit with silence? Okay, good. A lot of hands are going up. Well, I can definitely say that I do. During Rohatsu, which is we sit session in early part of December, Sensei Kodo did a talk, and one of the things that he said was lean into the silence. You know, lean into the silence. I don't know how many times that week and this week I've been thinking, you know, lean into the silence, lean into the silence. You know, it's so important. And we all can lean into the silence because it is such a deep support. So now, Sensei Dainin and I sit in front of you with these robes. And many people say they're gold robes. But in Japan, they're known by another name for the color. Does anybody know what it is? Come on, somebody knows. Mukuran, exactly. Well, historically, Mukuran's like a brown color, and monks would wear these black robes, and they'd wear them for years. It's not like they had multiple sets of robes they could wear. So they worked in their robes, and eventually they would fade, they'd be in the sun, and they would turn Mukuran, sort of like Monchin and Sagan's robes. Or so this is a hat that I bought 11 years ago in Japan, and you see the black. But over time and wearing it a lot, it's become Mukuran. So that's what happens. It was just as black. And from what I understand, there's another meaning for Mukuran, and another meaning for the Japanese term. Does anybody know what that is? I'm sure Sensei Kodo does. Yes, it's the color of silence, which I think is so beautiful because, you can look at these robes and just remember that silence is really deeply a part of our practice. We're all wrapped in silence, and, it's a refuge. And so I just want to encourage us all to know that we can deeply lean into silence. And this takes me to my case, which is the same case that we heard a few brief words a couple of weeks ago from Sensei Wendy. And it's case 141. Now, the beautiful thing is I'm going to have a much different perspective. And as Sensei Wendy says, every plunge into a koan is fresh, right? All right. So an outsider asked the world-honored one, I'm not asking you about the spoken. I'm not asking you about the unspoken. Oh, I'm sorry. Wrong page. One day, the world-honored one ascended the teaching seat, and the assembly came together. Mahakashya struck the mallet and announced, the world-honored one has just expounded the Dharma. And the world-honored one descended from his teaching seat. So the Buddha gets up on his teaching seat, and then we don't know how much time lapses between the first sentence and the second sentence where Mahakashya strikes the mallet. But typically there's an elaborate discourse that goes on. But here, there are no words. The Buddha doesn't say a thing. There are no sutras written. And then Mahakashya strikes that mallet and the Buddha gets down from his teaching seat. So I want to quickly look at the capping verse, which I find fascinating. A single path of spiritual light. From the beginning, nothing is hidden, subtly communicated without effort. At once, the spring breeze opens 1,000 blossoms. The spring breeze opens 1,000 blossoms. So again, Mahakashya has struck the mallet and says the world-honored one has just expounded the Dharma. And in medieval China, what the temple rector would strike this octagonal piece of wood that they called the place of silence. And when you would strike it, it was called striking the quietness. And so here, striking that mallet would normally call everyone to attention and everyone would focus and the Dharma would be presented. It's sort of like the chant before the Dharma talk. So Mahakashya strikes this mallet and presumably we have this discourse. But then instead of the discourse, we have what is normally said at the end of the talk. And the word that he uses is expounded. and expounded. He says the Dharma has been expounded, and this would be normally systematically and in detail, but nothing's been said. So, what's going on here? And this is really all that we get. And that capping phrase, I'm still stuck on that capping phrase. The spring breeze opens 1,000 blossoms. Now, thinking about this spring breeze and thinking about the Buddha's silence, I always sort of fall back on thinking about the story of when the Buddha was very young, Prince Siddhartha, and he left the palace. And for the first time, he walks outside and he sees the suffering of the world and the harshness of the world. He sees a sick person, he sees an older person, he sees a dead body. And from all of this, you know, he hadn't seen any of this before because his whole life had been a life protected and in luxury and sheltered from all of this. And once he saw all of this suffering, he wondered, how can people achieve happiness in the world when you have such harshness like this? And this is what really started his journey and set him off on the answer to find the truth of birth and death and peace of mind. And as you know, he experimented in so many ways. And deep, deep into his journey, he sought the wisdom of the ascetics and spent many years with them. And, the ascetics were those of the group that really sort of tortured and starved their bodies, trying to obviate having to deal with physical needs. And so after being with them for many years and all emaciated and struggling, no closer to his enlightenment, no closer to his peace of mind, he goes down by the river one day for a drink of water. And while he's by the river, there's a boat that starts drifting down the water, and on the boat is a musician. And the musician is teaching his students and says that, if the string is too tight, it will snap. And if the string is too loose, the instrument won't play. So the Buddha looked at this as like the ascetics versus a life of overindulgence. And really tired and sick and weak, he goes down by the river and he starts to think about a childhood memory. And he's under a sweet rose apple tree and he's watching these farmers in the field just toil, and they're like pulling their plows through the fields and they've got the oxen and they're just working hard and sweating. And what's being churned up from the plows is, some of the life in the soil is not, no longer alive. And it's just this big struggle. But he also notices the beautiful blue sky and the birds that are effortlessly flying through the air and the smell of that sweet apple tree. And then back beside the river, he recognizes that within that childhood memory, there was room for both suffering and beauty in the world. No string too tight, no string too loose. And he realized that in his silence, in his reflection, that things came to him. He realized the middle path. And we know that also in his silence, when he was under the Bodhi tree, he recognized his enlightenment. So silence really gives way to paying attention. It gives way to an awareness of the moment. Now, interestingly, case 141 has a companion case, and it's the 92nd case in the Blue Cliff record. And this is very helpful in thinking about the Buddha's silence. So I want to cover that. The Buddha ascends the teaching chair. He remains silent. And in this case, Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, hits the gavel and says, "Understand clearly the Dharma, the royal Dharma. The royal Dharma is thus." And the Buddha gets down from his teaching seat not having said a word. Now, this is very, very similar to Mahakashya, except for that last word, thus. The Dharma, the royal Dharma, is thus. And thus is a Sanskrit and Pali word, tathata, which is in that manner. But it also means reality as it is. Reality as it is. And that's also referred to as thusness or suchness. And you've probably heard of tathagata, how we refer to the Buddha as the tathagata, meaning the thusly gone one, or one who has gone or arrived at suchness. But it also means one who knows and sees reality as it is. So, can we see the present moment, reality as it is? Do you think this is the teaching that's flowing from the Buddhist silence? Just this. There's also a story in Dogen's collection where an outsider asks a question of the Buddha. I'm not asking you about the spoken. I'm not asking you about the unspoken. And the Buddha sits in silence. And the outsider says in admiration, the greatly compassionate, world-honored one has cleared the cloud of doubt and let me enter the way. And the outsider bowed and left. Do you think the outsider saw the Tathagata, the one who knows and sees reality as it is, and then the outsider knew as well? Maybe. So how do we pay attention to the unfolding of silence? Just this moment. And when we do, what can happen? So in the silence or in the silencing, when we're both on and off the cushion, there's sort of an undergirding, a truth that can come through, especially if we're paying attention, really paying attention and present. Many days in the morning, I say this routinely because I love this line out of the Jewel Mirror, causes and conditions at this moment shine completely in the silence. And I really believe that in our awareness, we can find our way. We really can find our way. And we can see reality as things are. And it's our solutions and our peace of mind, I think, that really they lie within us and how we perceive the world around us. I don't think there's any special formula or invitation for this to occur. We really do it all the time, with the silences that sort of seep through like the 10,000 Dharma gates. Oh, I see. So we all have the ability to be in the present moment. Or as Roshi Joan told us just this past weekend, let the moment teach you. Really let the moment teach you. Look, feel, listen, perceive reality as it is, and learn from it. I think we all have this ability. Really recognize that you have this and do this. Stephen Batchelor was here a number of years ago, and he asked all of us to ask ourselves, what is this? With really no interest in the answer, but to be open to what occurs next. Like, be open to what you hear, he says, in the silence that follows. And this goes to what Kozan just told us yesterday. You'll see what comes next. See what comes next. Just this. And this is what arises from within and what's going on all around us in every moment. I could give you a list of things to really pay attention to, but I'm not going to do that. One of the things I can tell you, though, is, we're in really complex times in the world, in the United States, and we've got to have all our eyes wide open, our ears wide open, our senses wide open, like really pay attention. Roshi says that our practice is really waking up to this very moment, to our life as it is, just as it is. So be fully present for it. And sort of on a hopeful note, just remember that the spring breeze opens 1,000 blossoms. And then, just like the Buddha who got up off of his teaching seat, know that in, some of you tonight and some of you in a couple days will get off your seats and go out into the world, to serve, to engage, to do good for others. And, that's our practice. And it's really needed now. Really needed.
Thank you. Beautiful. I just want to thank my Dharma brother for always being there for me, and it's an honor to walk this path with you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to Roshi, of course. Thank you for your patience with me over the years, your teachings. Oh, I forgot to turn this on. Your teachings, your love, your perseverance that made this beautiful space for us to practice. And thank you, Wendy Johnson Sensei, for your poetic and humble brilliance. Every time I hear your talk, I feel like you just ooze the years of Dharma, and I want to be like that one day, maybe next lifetime. And thank you to Sensei Kozan and Sensei Kodo for your teachings. And I just love our little Upaya team. And I see Jason here. He's the newest member of our Upaya team. And happy Lunar New Year. Yeah. It's a holiday that I grew up celebrating with my family. It's a time to gather, it's a time to be together with your family. We go from house to house, visiting our family and friends on that day. And so it's wonderful to be here with you. And it's the year of the snake. Snake in many cultures symbolize transformation and creative life force, because a snake sheds its skin. It can also symbolize spiritual awakening. And I was learning a little bit about the process of the molting of a snake skin this morning. And so interesting. They, right before the skin comes off, they secrete a little liquid on top of their eyes to separate the skin, the old skin from their eyes, and protect their eyes. And during that process, that liquid is a little bit opaque. And so when you look at the snake at that time, their eyes look a little blue and kind of hazy. And during that time, they're partially blind and quite vulnerable. So they tend to hide and wait for the time to come for their skin to come off. Fascinating. I feel like it's kind of like our spiritual formation process, where we shed our skin and we take care of ourselves to get ready for this new phase. So may this year be full of fruitful shedding for us and transformation. So the world-honored one, the who that Wendy talked about, ascends the teaching seat and doesn't say a thing. Every time this koan comes up, inevitably one of us new teachers would joke kind of wistfully, maybe we can do that too. We can just walk up to the seat, not say anything, and just leave. For one, we get to not have to prepare for a talk. It's always a love, not a love hate, but love mild dread kind of relationship. So we were like, oh, maybe we can just skip this one. And it seems kind of cool, right? And just come up here and just walk off. But but if I was in the audience and I was doing this, I would boo myself because it would be a performance. And not only that, it would be a bad performance because it's not very interesting, because it's not authentic. We would just be imitating this story of the world-honored one, or acting based on a conceptual understanding of the koan. In this book, Daido Lori comments on this koan. He says, there are some that think that the meaning of this case lies in the world-honored one's silence or his taking the high seat in the first place. Nothing can be further from the truth. There are others that look to the striking of the mallet to understand. This misses it completely. The Dharma is not to be found in the ascending of the seat, striking the mallet, Mahakashya's speech, or the honored one's silence. If you see into it here, you have seen into the hoax. So a koan, just the words of the koan, is just a story, a secondhand conceptual retelling of a moment. Like Kodo AI said the other day, an object contains, 10 to the 25th times more information than something like that, than words can convey. But this is about two live humans coming together and interacting. So it's even much more than that. So words can't really convey that real moment. So the practice and study of the koan is really for us to reclaim this authenticity within ourselves, through our lives, and not emulating the story. We need to feel it, to live it, to experience it through our lives. The best talk I have heard about this was by our dear friend Natalie Goldberg a couple of years ago, when she talked about the rhinoceros fan. Who was there for that talk? Yeah, wonderful talk, right? And it really helped me understand that you have to live the koan in order to understand it in a non-conceptual way. Maybe we can find that talk and put it up on the resource page for others after session. So what leads up to an authentic moment where we really are able to reveal our Buddha nature, our original face, or our natural mind? In a way, all the koans in this book is like that. It's about a moment of authenticity, connection, and inaction that Roshi talks about a lot. But really, I'm still trying to understand what authenticity is. And I remember researching this phrase that Dogen uses, that Kas translates as practice hyphenate realization in the Fukan Zazengi. And I was wondering what that Chinese phrase actually is. In the Fukan Zazengi, he writes, and Kas translates, the Zazen I speak of is not learning meditation. It is simply the Dharma gate of ease and joy. It is the practice realization of complete enlightenment. Practice realization. When you look up the Chinese word for that, is in Japanese you say shu shou, and in Chinese is so zheng, which is the first word is to repair or to practice, and the second word is to verify, to confirm, or authenticate, or authentic. So it's practice, authenticate, or practice to be authentic. So when we're doing Zazen, we're practicing authenticity. So sometimes in authenticity, we stay silent like the world-honored one. But sometimes we have to speak. And the world-honored one also spoke plenty. And that's why we have all these beautiful teachings. And sometimes we actually have to put our comfort or even our lives on the line. Sometimes we have to speak truth to power. And, in order to be authentic in all of these situations, we actually really have to let go of the burden of our conditioning and come from a place where we're not being reactive, but just being with that present moment. While every moment is an opportunity to show up authentically, whether we're, chopping carrots or crossing the road or doing samu, it can be especially important when we're called to serve. Roshi writes on inactive compassion, and she says, compassion can be seen as an emergent process in a dynamic, adaptive, and precarious relationship between the mind, body, and the lived environment. As I have suggested, compassion is spontaneous, non-algorithmic, or unprescribed. And as Francisco Varela says, compassion doesn't follow any rules. So, authentic compassion can arise from a moment of service, like sitting with a sick friend, or standing up for someone who might be targeted in the subway because of the color of their skin. It could be a moment of just connection with a stranger. But sometimes we're called to step up and step forward in a bigger way, and draw on our courage in the face of injustice. This is something that many of us will likely face in the coming days, whether it's just a small moment of speaking the truth or something bigger, or being kind to someone in a moment of need. So here's a story, a recent story coming out of the koan of our times. So who here knows who Reverend Marianne Edgar Buddy is? Some of you do. And if you're in session and winter practice period and you don't know who she is, I want to congratulate you, because that means that you haven't been online and have been practicing diligently. So she is the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington. She was in the news recently, in the recent weeks, because she gave a sermon during the presidential inauguration at the National Cathedral, where she pled for mercy, for dignity, for humility and kindness with the president who was in attendance at the National Cathedral. As you may guess, she has lots of supporters. But it was, but it was poorly received by the people she was addressing. She first came into a wider public awareness in 2020, where she spoke out against the forceful removal of protesters from Lafayette Square during the George Floyd protests in DC. And recently she published a book called How We Learn to Be Brave: Decisive Moments in Life and Faith, in which she describes, different kinds of decisive moments. Not all of them big and dramatic, Some moments are when you decide to go and do something, making a move. But some decisive moments are quiet and unseen, moments where you decide to stay. There are also decisive moments where you decide to step into a vision that you know will take many years to complete, like Roshi building this place and making that decision every day to persevere. She says in her book about these decisive moments, she says, "The courage to be brave when it matters most requires a lifetime of small decisions that set us on a path of self-awareness, attentiveness, and willingness to risk failure for what we believe is right." So here in session, we're giving our attention and tending to the smallest of decisions. Session, the word session, 解心, where's Yang? Where's Yang? I don't know where he is, but it's, hi, is 接收的解, 戒心, 接收的解, 戒心 is session, yeah. Sin is, heart, mind. And the first word means to receive, to collect, to gather, gathering our heart and mind. I love this image of, gathering all the bits and pieces of us that are spread out everywhere in our divided, distracted, and dispersed way of living, and putting them back into the container of session. That's what we're doing. The Reverend said, lifetime of small decisions that set us on a path of self-awareness, attention, and willingness to risk failure. So session is a safe space, a protected time, and a training ground for these smallest of decisions. Not the usual kind of decisions that we think of that, come out of our preferences, like choosing what we like, what gives us pleasure, and avoiding things that we dislike or cause us pain. But instead, we are making these decisions based on our shared values, our humanity, our integrity. And we're instructed to do all these small things in session, like closing the door carefully with both hands, mindfully, with respect to the space that we practice, the other people who we're practicing with. We decide to remember to turn off the lights in the room that we stay in. Roshi's smiling because she's always telling me to turn off the lights. So that we can remember our interconnectedness of our shared environment. I'm about maybe 80% on a good day now. I'm a slow learner. And we decide to eat oryoki, and while being, reminded that everything is given to us, that we decide to eat so that we honor our life force given to us by this food, and vow to use this energy for good. We decide to wash our bowls wholeheartedly. We decide to not look at our phones and let ourselves be completely present here. We also decide to sit and observe our minds. We become aware of our thoughts and the patterns of our thoughts and decide moment by moment to come back to our breath, deep in our body and the present moment. We also decide to practice one body, noticing everybody around us and being together, working together, breathing together. It all seems so small. All these decisions seem so small compared to the carelessness of the outside world. But these small decisions actually cultivate our field of awareness so that we can become less reactive and more in line with our integrity. Kind of like the snake. Like the snake slowly shedding its skin, we let go of our conditioning. And then we become kind of vulnerable for a little bit. And it's okay because we have this safe container session where we can let go into that vulnerability. So whether we're sitting zazen or in samu, we just let each moment be as it is. Practice realization, practicing authenticity, moment to moment. And this week during session, every noon liturgy, we chant the Enmei Juku Kanon Yo. And the English translation by Roshi and Kaz. And the last two lines are very different in different translations. But I love our translation because the word nen is kind of hard to translate. And the way that Kaz renders it, he said moment by moment, reminds me of this kind of presence of authenticity that arises in each moment, fresh. I'll read you the lines, the last 4 lines of the Enmei. In the morning, be one with Avalokiteshvara. In the evening, be one with Avalokiteshvara, whose heart moment by moment arises, whose heart moment by moment remains. So maybe one day, far into the future, maybe in the next lifetime, I would be able to come up here, sit down, sit in illumined moment by moment silence with no need for words. But until then, I deeply apologize that you would have to bear with my dualistic words and my wild fox slobber. Thank you.